A letter soaked in tension arrived at NBC studios on January 12, 1972. It was crumpled, stained with mud, and something darker, folded into thirds and sealed with fraying military tape. The envelope was addressed to no one. Just 3 words scrolled across the front. "Please read this." By 11:47 p.m. that Thursday night, it would stop the most powerful show in America cold. Johnny Carson, the man who had interviewed presidents without sweating, the king who made 17 million people laugh every single night, would stand in front of those cameras, read 9 sentences from that letter, and then do something no one saw coming. He would collapse right there on stage live in front of the entire country. But here's what nobody knew. Here's the part that makes this story impossible to forget. The letter wasn't just from any soldier. It wasn't just another piece of war correspondence that got lost in the mail and found its way to a TV studio. No, this letter was written by a 22-year-old corporal named Michael Chin exactly 36 hours before he died. And inside that envelope folded next to his final words was something else. Something that would break Johnny Carson in a way nothing ever had. But we'll get to that because first you need to understand how we got here. It was January 1972. The Vietnam War was ripping America apart. But Johnny Carson's Tonight Show, that was the one place the war didn't exist. That was the safe zone. The place where America came to forget, to laugh, to feel normal again. Carson had a rule, an unspoken law that everyone on his staff knew by heart. No heavy topics after 11:30. No politics, no war, no death until the night he broke every single one of those rules. But before we get to the moment Carson collapsed, you need to hear what was written in that letter. Because without understanding those words, you'll never understand why the strongest man on television fell to his knees. Keep watching. What happens next will leave you speechless. And if this story moves you, hit that like button and drop a comment below. January 14, 1972, 11:32 p.m. Eastern Time. The Tonight Show was at the absolute peak of its power. 17 million Americans were watching, not recording, not half paying attention, watching. Johnny Carson wasn't just a talk show host. He was the most trusted man in entertainment. If Carson liked you, America liked you. If he made a joke, the whole country laughed. He had more influence than most senators. More reach than the evening news. The show opened exactly the way it always did. The NBC Peacock logo shimmered across the screen. The iconic theme music kicked in. Doc Samson's trumpet cut through the studio. Ed McMahon's booming voice echoed. From Hollywood, The Tonight Show, starring Johnny Carson. The curtain parted. Carson walked out in his perfectly tailored navy suit, crisp white shirt, thin black tie. He waved to the roaring audience. Smiled that $1 million smile. Took his seat behind a big wooden desk like he had 1,000 times before. The monologue started a joke about President Nixon. A bit about California traffic. Laughter rolled through Studio One in Burbank like clockwork. Everything was smooth. Everything was normal. Everything was safe. But then for minutes and 18 seconds into the monologue, something changed. Carson stopped mid-sentence. He didn't finish the punchline. His hand moved slowly to the inside pocket of his jacket. The audience kept laughing, waiting for him to continue. But Carson wasn't smiling anymore. He pulled out a folded piece of paper, wrinkled, stained, clearly not part of the script. Ed McMahon leaned forward, confused. Doc Everinson's trumpet faltered. The audience's laughter began to fade into nervous silence. Carson unfolded the letter carefully like it might fall apart in his hands. His eyes scanned the first line, then the second, and everything about him changed. His jaw tightened, his shoulder stiffened, the color drained from his face. He looked up at document, made a subtle cutting motion with his hand. The music stopped. The entire studio went dead silent. 17 million people watching at home leaned closer to their screens. Carson cleared his throat. His voice, when it came, had no trace of humor. No setup, no charm. Just wait. I need to read you something, he said quietly. And I need you to listen. Ed shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He had no idea what was happening. Neither did the producers in the booth. Their fingers hovered over the commercial break button. But Carson didn't wait for permission. He began. But what he read in those first 30 seconds would set off a chain reaction that no one, not even Carson himself, was prepared for. Stay with me. This gets more powerful. If you're feeling this, go ahead and subscribe. You won't regret it. This letter, Carson said, his voice steady but stripped of all performance, was sent to our studio 2 days ago. It came from Vietnam. It's from a United States Marine named Corporal Michael Chun. He was 22 years old. A few people in the audience gasped softly. Carson paused, looked down at the letter, then back up at the camera. Michael Chun wrote this letter on December 6, 1971. Another pause. 2 days later, on December 8, he was killed in combat. The silence in that studio was suffocating. Carson's hands trembled slightly as he lifted the letter closer. He didn't address this to me. He didn't address it to anyone specific. He just wrote to whoever finds this. Please read it out loud. Please make sure someone hears it. You could hear people in the audience starting to cry. Carson took a slow breath and then he started reading. My name is Michael Chun. If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it home and I need to tell you something before I go. His voice cracked on the word go. He steadied himself. I've been here in Vietnam for 11 months. I've seen things no 22-year-old should ever see. I've lost brothers. I've written letters to families I'll never meet. I've carried bodies of men whose names I'll never forget. The camera stayed locked on Carson's face, tight, unflinching. But that's not what this letter is about. Carson paused again. His eyes glistened. This letter is about my mother. A wave of emotion swept through the studio. People covered their mouths. Ed McMahon wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Her name is Helen Chin, Carson read. She lives at 4247 Maple Street, Sacramento, California. And if you're reading this, it means the military has already knocked on her door. It means she already knows I'm gone. It means her world has already ended. Carson had to stop. He set the letter down on the desk, put his hand over his mouth, tried to compose himself. The audience waited. Doc Saintson had his head bowed like he was praying. Carson picked the letter back up. But here's what they won't tell her, he continued, his voice shaking now. Here's what she needs to know. He looked directly into the camera. Tears were streaming down his face now. No shame, no hiding. Tell her I wasn't afraid. Tell her that in my last moments I thought about Sunday mornings, about her blueberry pancakes, about the way she'd hum while folding laundry. Tell her I could hear her voice in my head saying, I love you, Michael. I'm so proud of you. The studio was drowning in silence and tears. And tell her. Carson's voice broke completely now. Tell her that the hardest part about dying wasn't leaving this world. It was leaving her. He set the letter down, put both hands on the desk to steady himself, and then he said 5 words that changed everything. But there's something else inside. The entire country held its breath because what came next, no one could have predicted. Don't go anywhere. What's about to happen is the most powerful moment in television history. Drop a comment if you're still watching. Carson reached into the envelope with shaking hands. He pulled out a second piece of paper, smaller, folded once. The edges were torn, like it had been ripped from a notebook in a hurry. Michael Chun included something else with his letter, Carson said, his voice barely above a whisper. Now, a note handwritten addressed to me. The audience gasped. Even Ed looked shocked. Carson unfolded the note slowly. His eyes scanned it, and for a moment, he couldn't speak. He just stared at the words, his chest rising and falling. When he finally looked up, his face was completely transformed, raw, broken, human in a way America had never seen him. It says, Carson began, his voice trembling. Mr. Carson, my mom watches your show every single night after my dad died 3 years ago. Your show was the only thing that made her smile. If I don't make it home, could you tell her on your show that I love her? That everything I am, I learned from her. Because if she hears it from you, Mr. Carson, maybe she'll believe it. The note fell from Carson's hands onto the desk. He sat there, silent, staring at nothing. The producers in the booth didn't know what to do. Cut to commercial. End the show. But then Carson did something no one expected. He stood up. Ed's eyes went wide. Carson walked out from behind his desk, stepped past the guest chairs, and walked directly toward the studio audience. The camera scrambled to follow him. He stopped in front of a woman sitting in the third row. Middle-aged, crying quietly into a tissue. Carson knelt down in front of her. He said gently. "What's your name?" "Linda," she whispered. "Linda, do you have someone overseas?" She nodded, unable to speak. "Who?" "My son." She choked out. His Indenom Carson reached out, took her hand in both of his. "He's going to come home, Linda," Carson said. Not as a joke, not as a bit, as a promise he had no right to make. "He's going to walk through your door. And you're going to hold him." Linda broke down completely. Carson stayed there, kneeling, holding her hand, letting her cry. The cameras captured every second. No one in that audience was clapping. They were witnesses, silent, reverent. After a long moment, Carson stood. He walked back to his desk, sat down, looked at the camera. "Mrs. Helen Chun," he said, his voice steady now, filled with purpose. "If you're watching this, I want you to know something. Your son, Michael, loved you more than anything in this world. He was a hero. And even in his final moments, you were the one he thought about." Carson paused. "But I need to tell you something else, Mrs. Chun." He reached for the red rotary phone on his desk, the prop phone, the one that had never been used. "Because about an hour ago, I made a phone call. I called the Department of Defense. I told them about your son's letter." He lifted the receiver. "Mrs. Chun, if you're home right now, this line is connected and I'd like to speak with you live right now." The audience couldn't believe what they were hearing. Carson held the phone to his ear. It didn't ring. The line was already open and then a voice came through. Soft, fragile, shaking. "Hello. 17 million people stop breathing. What happens in this next moment will shatter you. Keep watching. And if this is hitting you, hit that like button. Let's make sure this story is never forgotten." Mrs. Chun Carson's voice was gentle. "Reverend." "Yes," she whispered. "This is Helen." The studio was frozen. Not a sound, not a movement. "Mrs. Chun, this is Johnny Carson. I'm calling you live from The Tonight Show." "I know," she said quietly. "I've been watching." Carson's eyes filled with tears again. "Mrs. Chun, I just read your son's letter. I read his note and I am so deeply sorry for your loss." There was silence on the other end. Then the sound of her crying. "Thank you." She finally managed. "Thank you for reading it." Carson said, his voice shaking. "Your son asked me to tell you something. He said he wasn't afraid. He said in his last moments he thought about you about Sunday mornings. About blueberry pancakes, about your voice." Helen sobbed openly through the phone. "He said the hardest part wasn't dying, it was leaving you." The camera stayed on Carson's face. Tears streamed freely now. "But Mrs. Chun, he also said everything he was. Every bit of courage, every ounce of honor he learned from you. He was my whole world, Mr. Carson." Helen's voice came through, broken and small. "I know," Carson whispered. There was a long pause. Just two people crying. One in Burbank, one in Sacramento, connected by grief too big for words. "Mrs. Chun, I want to make you a promise. Every year on December 8th, I'm going to read Michael's letter on this show. I'm going to make sure America never forgets." "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much. God bless you, Mrs. Chun. God bless you, Mr. Carson." The line went dead. Carson set the phone down gently, stared at the letter, and then without warning, his body started to shake. He tried to stand. His legs gave out. Johnny Carson collapsed forward onto his desk. Ed McMahon lunged, catching him. The audience screamed. America watched the most powerful man on television crumble under the weight of one mother's grief and one son's love. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was something sacred. Stay with me. There's more to this story that will change how you see everything. Subscribe if you haven't yet. This is a story that matters. 4:38 seconds. The camera stayed on Johnny Carson slumped over his desk. Ed McMahon holding him, whispering, "I've got you, Johnny. I've got you." The studio audience didn't know whether to move, to help, to leave. They just sat there crying, witnessing something they'd never forget. A medic rushed from backstage. "Check Carson's pulse, his breathing." "He's okay," the medic said. "It's shock, emotional exhaustion. He just needs a moment." Slowly, carefully, Ed and the medic helped Carson sit back up in his chair. His face was pale, his eyes red and swollen, but he was conscious. The audience, without any cue, began to applaud. Not the polite TV applause, but the kind of applause that says, "We see you. We're with you. You're not alone." Carson looked out at them, managed a weak smile. Then he looked at the camera. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice unbroken. "I apologize. I didn't mean to," but he couldn't finish. Ed put a hand on his shoulder. "Johnny," Ed said gently, "you don't need to apologize for being human." Carson nodded, took a breath. Then he looked back at the camera one more time. "Mrs. Chun, if you're still watching, I meant every word. Michael will not be forgotten. Not by me. Not by this show. Not by this country." He folded the letter fully, placed it in his jacket pocket, right over his heart. "That's all for tonight," Carson whispered. The show ended 14 minutes early. No guests, no comedy, no music, just a letter, a phone call, a promise, and a man who broke because he cared too much to stay whole. The next morning, NBC received over 50,000 letters. All saying the same thing. Thank you. But the most powerful part of this story, it didn't end that night. Keep watching. What Carson did next will restore your faith in humanity. Comment below if this story moved you. Johnny Carson kept his promise. Every single year on December 8th for the next 20 years, he read Michael Chen's letter on The Tonight Show. He never advertised it, never hyped it, he just did it. And every year, millions tuned in. Not for laughs, for remembrance. When Carson retired in 1992, he personally visited Helen Chin in Sacramento, gave her the original letter, framed, told her that honoring Michael had been the greatest privilege of his career. When Johnny Carson passed away in 2005, his family found something in his personal safe. A photograph. It was Carson and Helen Chun taken in 1985. Both smiling, both holding the letter on the back in Carson's handwriting. "The night I learned television wasn't about being famous. It was about being human." That letter changed everything. Not just for Carson, for everyone who watched. Because it proved that the most powerful thing you can do isn't make people laugh. It's make them feel, make them remember, make them care. That's what it means to matter.